Rock is without a doubt one of the worst types in all of Pokemon. And so trying to answer the question of what is the best rock type Pokemon is actually somewhat difficult. There have only ever been 3 rock type Pokemon that have won the world championships, and each of them has only won once. But I want to talk about the 10 best rock type Pokemon, so I need a little bit more to go on. With that being said, I've looked through a ton of old history and looked at old tournaments, and I have a list that I feel really confident is the 10 best rock type Pokemon in all of competitive Pokemon's history. Starting with number 10, Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl is a cool Pokemon. It's one of the original fossil Pokemon. The design is sick and it's just iconic, right? And actually, although Aerodactyl hasn't been great in competitive play, it's better than all of the other rock types below it. Aerodactyl's never been used a ton, but it got second place back in 2014 at a Korean national event. It was also used a fair bit during the first year of Sun and Moon's format, and even made it to the final bracket at the World Championships in the final year of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. Aerodactyl's mostly used because it's the fastest rock type Pokemon. When it saw play in 2014, it was used with this really interesting set where it was used more for support than it was for raw damage. The team that got second at Korean nationals had this really interesting Aerodactyl set that paired it with Bisharp. The idea was Aerodactyl would move first and hit both your opponent's Pokemon with Rock Slide, and then Bisharp would attack with the move Assurance, which deals double damage if the target has already taken damage. Aerodactyl gets some really useful supporting moves, such as Wide Guard, which is just like a great competitive staple and is almost always useful, and also the move Skydrop, which is a bit of a niche move that has since been removed from the game, that allowed Aerodactyl to take a threat up into the air for 1 turn and prevent them from attacking. With Skydrop, you could not only temporarily take a threat out of commission to keep your partner Pokemon alive, but you could also use it to pick up a target that you wanted to KO while switching in something that could KO that Pokemon, basically leaving them stuck in the air while you repositioned. Aerodactyl also gets the move Tailwind, which it's used a little bit before, and like I mentioned, it has seen some use in its Mega form as well. Mega Aerodactyl is even faster and is able to be like a hybrid offensive and supporting Pokemon using moves like Tailwind or Wide Guard, as well as Rock Slide and maybe a coverage move as well to do some good damage. One thing we're going to talk about a fair bit on this list, because we're talking about a lot of rock type Pokemon, is the move Rock Slide. So part of the reason that rock type Pokemon aren't considered that good in general is because the type has a lot of weaknesses. That's the main weakness. But a secondary weakness is that almost all of the good physical rock type attacks have imperfect accuracy. Rock Slide, Stone Edge, Rock Blast, what else is there? Like Stone Axe, like almost all rock moves just they can miss, and that's really hard when you're trying to win. You know, like you don't want your moves to miss. The thing is that even though Rock Slide can miss, it also has this absolutely broken secondary effect where Rock Slide hits both your opponent's Pokemon, and while it's not the strongest move, in fact it's actually relatively weak by competitive move standards, every Pokemon that it hits has a 30% chance of flinching, meaning if you hit both your opponent's Pokemon, you have above a 50% chance of flinching one of them. This move is extremely disruptive and it's extremely threatening, and there have been lots of battles that have been lost that otherwise would have been won because of an untimely Rock Slide flinch. Aerodactyl was especially good because if you didn't get rid of it quickly, it would just continue to click Rock Slide, and while it wasn't doing the most damage, like every one of those Rock Slides could flinch one of your Pokemon, which could swing a battle. Anyway, Aerodactyl's not the best Pokemon, but it is one of the best rock types. Our number 9 slot actually is probably one of the best rock type Pokemon ever, but it's still relatively low on the list because it just hasn't been out for that long. I'm talking about Ogerpon Rock. Ogerpon Rock, or Ogerpon Cornerstone, is one of the 4 forms of the legendary Pokemon Ogerpon. I think it's a legendary. I'm actually not entirely sure, but let's say it's a legendary. Each of the Ogerpons has a different ability, and for Ogerpon Rock, which I'll just be calling Ogerpon moving forward, that's Sturdy. Sturdy's really good for Ogerpon because it prevents it from being knocked out in any one single attack. Effectively, if you're familiar with the Focus Sash item, it's that but in ability form. And the reason this matters is because Ogerpon walks this line actually somewhat similar to Aerodactyl, though it does it in a different way, between being an offensive Pokemon and a supportive Pokemon. Ogerpon has good offensive stats. It's relatively fast and relatively strong. It's not exceptionally fast or exceptionally strong, but it's fast and strong enough, okay? However, one of the main draws of using Ogerpon is that it gets one of the best supporting moves in the game, Follow Me. Follow Me, extremely good, okay? That's why Pachirisu won Worlds, okay? It was Follow Me. And has made a lot of Pokemon that otherwise wouldn't be worth using into actual legitimate threats, such as Clefairy and Magmar and Electabuzz. And Ogerpon is a legendary Pokemon, and it certainly acts like a legendary Pokemon. And so giving it Follow Me means that it can be paired with some really powerful, fast, offensive Pokemon and be quite threatening. It's often used with Pokemon like Koraidon and Chi-Yu, where the idea is basically that you have this super strong attacker and then you pair it with Ogerpon and they just can't get to the Pokemon doing all the damage. And why Ogerpon is nice for this compared to something like Clefairy, for example, is the fact that it also is a good offensive Pokemon on its own. Because all the rock moves miss, it's actually quite difficult to get rock type coverage on your team. And so having a Pokemon like Ogerpon where you can actually use it as a supporting Pokemon, or you can use the very powerful IV Cudgel attack, which never misses and also has a heightened crit rate, is actually something that a lot of teams can take advantage of. Ogerpon's an interesting Pokemon because there was a period where it seemed like the Water Mask was best, and then it seems like the Fire Mask is best, and then in the current format it seems like the Rock Mask is best. But I think what's neat about Ogerpon is that it fills a niche that rock type Pokemon don't really have, which is a rock type redirector. It might, I need to double check, but it might be the only rock type redirector unless there's like some weird Rage Powder Pokemon I'm forgetting about. Anyway, if this video was made a little bit later, I might have put Ogerpon Rock higher up. Even though it's been out for like not that long, it's been seeing a lot of use, but even though it's been seeing a lot of use, it hasn't been winning that many events. I think it's a good Pokemon. I don't personally think it's a great one, but I mean, we'll have to see how it stands against the test of time. Speaking of, coming in at number 8 is a Pokemon that's been around for quite a while and originally being introduced in Generation 4, Rhyperior. I talked a little bit about Rhyperior in the best ground type video, which you should go watch if you haven't already. But basically what you need to know is that when Sword and Shield first released, Rhyperior was by far one of the best Pokemon. And that's primarily because of how it interacted with Dynamax. As a ground and a rock type, Rhyperior has a pretty terrible defensive matchup spread. Because it has 2 quadruple weaknesses to grass and water. Even 1 quadruple weakness is quite bad, so having 2 and having them be against relatively common types, disaster mode. And to make matters worse, Rhyperior is also weak to other types like steel and ground, both of which are somewhat common. This is a big part of the reason why Rhyperior hasn't really been good outside of these specific circumstances. However, Rhyperior's ability Solid Rock reduces the damage that it takes from super effective hits. And while it's not enough to make Rhyperior good on its own, when you combine it with the HP doubling effect of Dynamax, Rhyperior suddenly becomes very hard to KO. Dynamax did more than just double Rhyperior's health though. Its main weakness is that defensively it has lower special defense and it's not really like that great, but the specific max moves that it uses both helped with this, with Max Quake raising its team's special defense and Max Rockfall setting up the Sandstorm, which also raises the special defense of all rock type Pokemon. Rhyperior is a rock type. This is the best rock type video. Oh, I didn't need me to explain that one. The real thing that brought the set online though is the item weakness policy, which gives 2 stages of increased attack and special attack when the Pokemon is hit with a super effective move. Players would pair Rhyperior with a weak Trick Room attacker such as Dusclops and use moves like Bulldoze or Brick Break to attack their own Rhyperior. This would double its stats without really doing any meaningful damage, which would leave you with a Rhyperior with doubled HP, double attack, moves that had all been powered up by an additional 50% on top of the weakness policy boost, and the ability to make itself tankier just by attacking that could also do damage through Protect. And so when you say it all like that, I guess it's not so surprising that Rhyperior was really good. Now, it is worth noting that Rhyperior hasn't really seen much play outside of the beginning of Sword and Shield, and I think it's because like, yeah, it really needed these specific conditions to get online. And also they introduced Urshifu Water, which is not good for Rhyperior. But even though it hasn't really seen much play outside of this specific time, it was so dominant then that I still think it deserves a spot in this list. Now, unless I'm much mistaken, this video is actually the penultimate what is the best Pokemon of specific type. At this point, I've done every single one of them except for Dark. I've saved Dark for last. I'll let you guess why. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this series and you want to see more like it, make sure you hit subscribe. There are a lot of you who are watching this thinking you're subscribed because the YouTube algorithm is currently showing you my videos, and you're not actually subscribed. And if you subscribe, you'll be more likely to get recommended videos regardless of, you know, what the algorithm is doing. Also, it helps myself out. There's like 30 plus people who work on this channel, so you're helping them out too. And I can give you my guarantee that I only ever put videos out that I feel really confident in, are high quality and are worth people's time. And if you ever feel like I break that promise and that I'm, you know, just putting out slop or whatever, feel free to unsubscribe. I'm pretty confident that we're not going to reach that point, but that's my personal mentality. Anyway, continuing with number 7 is Gigalith, or as longtime viewers of this channel may know it as, Gigalith. Gigalith is actually the first Pokemon on our list that has won an international level event, which is the second highest event outside of the World Championships. It's also won several different regional level events. And this might be a bit surprising because Gigalith isn't a Pokemon that, you know, many players probably have seen if they started playing in the last, you know, 2 generations. It's not a Pokemon generally considered to be very good, except that right when Pokemon Sun and Moon released, Gigalith was one of the best Pokemon out there. It's a little similar to Rhyperior, but it's higher up on the list because it has a higher peak, having won an international, and its dominance also lasted for a longer time. It was pretty much good for the entire first year of Sun and Moon. Basically, what you have to understand about why Gigalith was so good is that during the beginning of Sun and Moon, weather was one of the most dominant strategies. And the main weather that people were using was rain, though Sun saw a little play as well, and there was a little hail, not snow. There was a little hail, but it was mostly rain. Basically, the main strategy was that Pelipper would set the rain up for a Swift Swim water type partner, who a lot of the time was actually Golduck. That might seem like a joke, but yeah, like Golduck was a top threat at the time. And part of the reason this worked then and not later is because these games introduced Z moves, which were already doing tons of damage. And with Swift Swim active, your water type attacker would like always move before most opposing Pokemon. And then you were already getting a boost from the rain, and then you would also get the boost from the Z move. So yeah, you could basically just one-shot everything. The water Z move was called Hydro Vortex, and like if you didn't resist it, I don't know if there's really any Pokemon that could survive the hit, assuming the rain was up. And normally when a Pokemon like Pelipper is good, you have access to other powerful weather setters. You know, like right now you could use Koraidon or Groudon, right? But at the time, those Pokemon weren't allowed. And so the best option that was left was Gigalith. Gigalith has the Sandstream ability, which sets up the sand every time it switches in. And so it could actually fight Pelipper for control of the weather and shut down the huge power of the rain duo. Gigalith was also especially good in this format because one of the best Pokemon, if not maybe the best Pokemon, was Porygon 2, who often liked to set up the Trick Room. Trick Room causes slow Pokemon to move before fast ones, and Gigalith is extremely slow. Gigalith was a really good Z move holder. I could just do a ton of damage with, I think it was called Continental Crush. I'm actually amazed that I remember so many of the names of these things because it's been a little bit. But it didn't even need to hold the Z move. Like some players chose to use like some of the, like a berry to heal it, or I don't know, some other items as well. I think in theory you could use Weakness Policy, but I don't think it was actually used very often. And it was just the slow, reliable Trick Room attacker that could use Rock Slide inside of Trick Room to flinch everything, output good consistent damage. It wasn't like a delete button, but it was especially useful versus Pelipper, and it was really good against Torkoal as well, and Alolan Ninetales. Like it could just fight for control of the weather, and in this format that was really valuable. Also, as an aside, Gigalith was especially good this year because in this specific year there was no like individual match timer. Like nowadays each game can only take 20 minutes, but back then a game could take up, like one game could take up to an hour, and there was nothing really stopping it. And basically this meant that battles would go on a lot longer than they do nowadays. Like it wasn't that uncommon to have a battle go longer than 20 minutes, which is, yeah, I mean, like now it forces you to stop after 20 minutes. And so this is kind of the one generation where you could kind of play stall if you wanted, like the play style of stall. And so many Porygon 2, because dealing with opposing Porygon 2 was so difficult, would use the move Toxic to do damage over time. And Gigalith's Sandstream damage, while not really remarkable on its own, was actually extremely threatening when paired specifically with the move Toxic, because like you're just doing basically an extra turn of poison damage every turn. Now, even though Gigalith was really good during this year, it's seen pretty much no play outside of it because there are better weather setters in the game, and Gigalith is not one of them. But I do think it's cool that it was really able to shine during this first year of Sun and Moon. Okay, so even though this is a top 10 list, in my mind, there's kind of sections. So the number 10 slot, Aerodactyl, that was its own section. And then the next section of Ogerpon, Rhyperior, and Gigalith has been another cluster where like Ogerpon and Gigalith and Rhyperior, these Pokemon were like good but not great. Gigalith and Rhyperior were like really dominant for a short time frame. Ogerpon has been around for less time, but seems to be like a higher level of Pokemon, a higher caliber of Pokemon, though its results aren't incredible. Now we're in the Pokemon that are like actually good, like actually consistently good. That's not even true. That's not even true. Okay, you know what it actually is? Now we're into Pokemon that also really have been only good in specific circumstances, but how good they've been has been a little bit higher, and maybe they've lasted for a little bit longer. I shouldn't have even brought up clusters. It's stupid. The number 6 slot on our list is Hisuian Arcanine. So Hisuian Arcanine is a Pokemon that was added, well, with Legends Arceus, and only became competitively legal for the first time. It was Worlds 2023. That was the first time that you could use it. And so it hasn't really been around for that long. Despite that, Hisuian Arcanine has already won an international level event and several regional level events. There was like one 6-month window where Hisuian Arcanine just popped off. That's the time when it won the international and it won a bunch of its other events. And if I'm not much mistaken, there was this period following Worlds where I think it won almost every event. Like it was like 5 events and 5 Hisuian Arcanine wins, kind of out of nowhere, which is really surprising because this doesn't look like a Pokemon at first glance that should be really dominating tournaments. But I think what makes Hisuian Arcanine so good is that it's able to do tons of damage while also supporting its team. The support primarily comes from its ability Intimidate. Some of you may know that fire type Intimidate users are quite good. And it also has access to some supporting moves, like mostly the one that people would use is Will-O-Wisp, though of course it could use Snarl or Helping Hand as well. For the most part, people aren't using Hisuian Arcanine to support though, they're using it to do damage. Most of the time, they're going to give it an item such as the Choice Band and take advantage of its good natural speed and attack stats, and its access to a lot of really dangerous moves like Flare Blitz, Extreme Speed, and Rock Slide. We've talked about Rock Slide before as kind of this move that is intended to do a little chip damage and like also maybe flinch, but it's also really threatening as an attack that actually is doing good damage if you give it like a Choice Band or you boost up its attack somehow. Because even though Pokemon that are doing a lot of damage tend to be frailer, like these Pokemon, if they get a flinch, can be really devastating. I actually learned this firsthand.
Still on the field, but the Rock Slide just to keep whittling away at these Pokemon. Iron Hands is doing very, very little in terms of that damage.
It also has a number of other useful moves. The biggest one that I haven't talked about yet is Extreme Speed, which is just really useful at, finishing off a Pokemon with low HP. Also good with Choice Band. Part of the reason I think I didn't expect Hisuian Arcanine to be good when it first came out is that Fire and Rock is really abysmal defensive typing. Like, it's really bad. You have quadruple weaknesses to both ground and water, which are two of the most common types in the game, and you have a bunch of other weaknesses as well. But the thing is, with Terastallization, Hisuian Arcanine can actually turn off these weaknesses, which is very valuable. Now, it is worth noting that pretty much as soon as Incineroar came back, Hisuian Arcanine usage has sputtered out, and it sputtered out somewhat quickly. But actually, there was a time where Incineroar was legal, where I think players forgot how good Incineroar was, and they were calling it a fraud. And I think during that time, Hisuian Arcanine saw a little bit of play still. But yeah, once players remembered that it's Incineroar, it hasn't really been used again. That being said, I think it's like a good, fair Pokemon. Like, I don't think it's super broken, but in a format where the power level is lower and, you don't have Incineroar, I could see Hisuian Arcanine being used again. It's a cool Pokemon, and it's cool to have like a really good offensive rock type Pokemon that's also able to do some support. I think it's an interesting Pokemon, and the only reason I could see for it not being used in the future is that sometimes the regional variants tend to not show up in games until after, like, well, Pokemon like Incineroar are legal. Coming in at number 5, funnily enough, is a Pokemon that shares the typing with the Pokemon we just talked about. It's another fire and rock type, Coalossal. During the pandemic, when all events were canceled, we had these replacement tournaments that were online and extremely competitive called the Players' Cups. There were 4 of them in total, and these were pretty widely agreed upon to be probably slightly above an international level, like below a world championship, but either around or slightly above an international. Very prestigious events where most players from around the world were competing from, and they could do it from their own home, which is part of what made this, a very, very challenging event. It had 3 different phases. It was very hard to win. I won one of them, and I did it with Coalossal. And actually, Coalossal won a second Players' Cup as well, the one prior to the one that I won. That was phrased terribly, but Coalossal won half of the Players' Cups events, okay? Coalossal plays somewhat similarly to Rhyperior. He uses Dynamax to double its HP stat, and it holds the Weakness Policy item to double its offense. However, while Rhyperior preferred to be used inside of Trick Room, Coalossal was used almost entirely outside of it. This is because of its Steam Engine ability, which is a signature ability for this line. Basically, what this ability does is it sets Coalossal speed to the maximum possible boost number, which is +6, whenever it gets hit with either a fire or a water type move. +6 speed is the equivalent of quadrupling your speed stat, which it's not nothing. The way that the strategy worked is that Coalossal would Dynamax first, and then you'd have a fast Pokemon using a weak water type move, which was normally Surf Dragapult, though there were a couple other options as well. And you would hit Coalossal, which would activate the Weakness Policy, doubling its special attack, and also activate Steam Engine, which would set it to +6 speed, and then it would kill everything because it would also have double HP, so it was really difficult to get rid of it. You didn't need to rely on Dragapult though. I also used Aqua Jet Urshifu Rapid Strike as well as a secondary option, because even though Urshifu is a lot stronger than Dragapult when it comes to like Aqua Jet versus Surf, Coalossal is super high physical defense, so you weren't actually that bothered by taking the move, though you would prefer for it to be Surf for sure. Anyway, even if this were all that Coalossal did, it would already be considered, I think, a pretty valid strategy, but the thing that really made Coalossal broken was the fact that it got a signature Gigantamax form. This form allowed it to use Gmax Vocalith, which is one of the most broken Gigantamax moves in the game. I guess technically it is the most broken Gigantamax move that they made, which is saying something because a lot of them were pretty good. Gmax Vocalith would deal tons of passive damage every turn for 4 turns to all of your opponents that weren't rock type. And since most rock type Pokemon aren't that good, that most of the time meant you were dealing maximum damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon. So yeah, the combo was basically super broken, and I really enjoyed using it. It was really mean. But despite actually being in Scarlet and Violet, Coalossal has seen almost no use, because without Dynamax and without its Gigantamax form, it's really not anywhere near as good. But I don't want to end this section on a sad note, because I really like Coalossal. So here's a Coalossal fun fact for you. Did you know that it gets a signature move called Tar Shot? It's not a very good signature move, but it is a signature move, and it is funny. Okay, we're into the top 4 now, and coming in at number 4 is Nihilego. Nihilego? Someone's gonna be mad about how I pronounce that, but I think that one actually might be right. Anyway, Nihilego was one of the best Ultra Beasts, which are they're not legendaries, I think. They're like their own thing. You know what Ultra Beasts are, right? They're weird. They're weirdo Pokemon, right? It's a bunch of bugs. Nihilego isn't technically a bug type, but it is a bug. Just like Coalossal, Nihilego is a special attacker, and I think those are maybe our only special attackers on the list. Nihilego is fast, powerful, and specially bulky for its time. And I say for its time because it has lower defense, special attack, special defense, and speed than Fluttermane. Also, it has a worse typing and a worse move pool. But it was really good during Sun and Moon. Nihilego is a poison and rock type Pokemon, which was really useful because like fairy type Pokemon are the best type in the game. And so being able to hit them for super effective damage is really nice. Nihilego was normally played as this kind of like fast and frail offensive Pokemon because while it is decently specially bulky, yeah, it's specially bulky. I don't need to qualify it. It's a specially bulky Pokemon, but its physical defense is actually pretty dog water. And so it's quite hard to keep it alive. And because of this, most of the time people were using offensive items like Focus Sash, which I guess is a defensive item, but allows you to play it like an offensive Pokemon. Life Orb, occasionally Choice Scarf was used, or a Z Crystal. These all had use as well. But the thing is that it wasn't forced to be purely offensive either. I helped popularize a set that used Grassy Seed, which would be paired with Tapu Bulu to really bolster up its physical defense. You could use Substitute, and you would take advantage of the fact that the poison and rock type coverage that you had allowed you to hit basically all of the fire, water, and grass type Pokemon that were popular at the time. Water isn't weak to either type, but Tapu Fini was the main water type, which is weak to poison. Then again, the main grass type was Kartana, who isn't weak to either of the types, so maybe this is a bad analogy, but in certain situations, it was quite nice to have these two types together. Also, when the power level got higher, Nihilego actually got a little bit better. It was used in the restricted format during Sun and Moon because it matched up really well into Xerneas, thanks to its huge special bulk and its poison typing. This is actually the time when Nihilego won its international level event, and it used both Sludge Bomb and the move Clear Smog to try and help versus Xerneas. Also, Nihilego as an Ultra Beast has the Beast Boost ability, which could be really threatening. This ability boosts your highest stat whenever you get a KO. It's a little bit like Grim and Chilling Neigh, except that you could choose which stat that you boosted with Nihilego. Like you could either get a speed boost or a special attack boost depending on how you trained it. And if you got either boost, you could very quickly take more KOs, which would then result in more boosts. I will say that Nihilego is held back a little bit by its awful defensive typing and its low defense stat, but even still, it was definitely one of the best Pokemon during Sun and Moon, and I think we would definitely see it a fair bit in Scarlet and Violet if it had been in the game. Okay, now it's time to talk about some honorable mentions. There really weren't that many good rock type Pokemon that I left off the list, barring Glamora. Glamora is okay, and maybe like I thought about putting on the list. It's probably number 11, but outside Glamora, there's like no more good rock types. So instead, we're going to talk about some funny Pokemon in honorable mentions that like saw a little use. Rhydon got top 4 at the World Championships. It's actually got a better finish than Rhyperior, so it gets an honorable mention. It was using the Eviolite item to make itself tankier and the Lightning Rod ability to help versus Thundurus, who was a menace back then. Shuckle, I like to talk about Shuckle, even though it's never really been that good. There was one strategy used in like sometime during Sun and Moon that basically used the move Guard Split, which, you know, averages your defenses with whatever you hit, and you would use it on your own partner Chansey, and then Chansey would use Minimize to make itself impossible to hit and would use like Toxic and Seismic Toss, sometimes Defense Curl as well, and just be really rude and yeah, just try and win basically by eventually stalling out the opponent. My favorite Shuckle strategy is one that used Z Power Swap, which would Power Split, what's it called? Power Trick. Okay, you use Z Power Trick, which the way it works is they'd lead Mimikyu and Shuckle. Mimikyu would use Trick Room. Shuckle would use Z Power Trick, which switches your attack and your defense stats. So suddenly Shuckle would be using its defense stat as its attack stat, and then it would do a ton of damage, and Z Power Trick gives you an attack boost. I lost to this a bunch on the ladder. It was never really used anywhere, but I think it's really cool, so I wanted to mention it. I got top 16 in a regional with Laleep, not Cradilly, but Laleep. It was stupid. It was really stupid. It was actually suboptimal and would have been better if it was Cradilly, or maybe it was fine to be Laleep, but like I didn't get I couldn't get a Slowking with the Speed Ivy I wanted, so the strategy didn't even work properly. You were supposed to use your own Surf to power up your Laleep and then be really tanky. It was stupid. I got top 16. I also got top 16 with level 1 Aaron. Level 1 Aaron would use Endeavor, have the sturdy ability to survive any hit, and then heal back with the Shell Bell. Most of these strategies aren't very good, but I like them, so I wanted to mention them. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about the top 3. Coming in at 3rd place is Terrakion. So remember how I mentioned that there were only 3 rock type Pokemon that have won the World Championships? Well, they're at numbers 1, 2, and 3. So at this point, every Pokemon has won Worlds. Congratulations. If you made it this far, you get to see the World's winning Mons. So Terrakion was by far one of the best Pokemon back in 2011. Truthfully, it's a little bit weird to talk about 2011 because that was the first year of Black and White's competitive format, and it banned every single Pokemon that wasn't native to Black and White's Pokedex, which was all the new Pokemon. So this year was a little bit like, it was weird, right? Because there weren't any of the classics. Like, it was only new Pokemon. It was kind of its own self-contained metagame. Like, it was just the kind of the weird thing. And if that was the only time when Terrakion had been good, I probably wouldn't have put it up here, even though that was the year that it won Worlds. The thing is that Terrakion has had a lot of success in other formats as well. Basically, Terrakion is like probably the best consistent, fast, strong, physical attacking rock type. It's a rock and fighting type Pokemon, which actually is very nice synergy because rock doesn't hit steel type Pokemon at all, and you can hit those with fighting type moves. And then fighting moves are resisted by like flying and bug types, which rock hits for super effective. So they have pretty good offensive synergy. Terrakion also has decent bulk, which is really nice because like, yeah, it's so fast and strong, or it was so fast and strong for the time that it's really good at putting out like just tons of damage. This is another case of fast Pokemon with Rock Slide makes people mad. Everyone who played back then has horror stories of the opponent just leading Terrakion, who would often hold the Choice Scarf, by the way, to beat other Terrakion back then. So they would lead Terrakion, click Rock Slide, and flinch all your Pokemon until you lost. It was really frustrating. Terrakion saw some use outside of just that first year of 2011, though. It was good pretty much for a lot of the Black and White era, for both Black and White 2 and yeah, Black and White 1. And then also some play during X and Y as well. And actually a little bit during Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon and Sun and Moon as well. So it's been pretty decent for a while, even though it hasn't been a top Pokemon since, I would say, Black and White. Part of what makes Terrakion so good is that it works with a lot of different items. Like you can hold Focus Sash, you can hold the Choice Scarf. I got second at the World Championships with Choice Band Terrakion, which would just do tons of damage. You would hit something with close combat, and if it was resisted, it would still take like half of its health. And Choice Band Rock Slide was really mean. You could also pair this with Thunderous and go for like, yeah, Thunder Wave plus Rock Slide. That was a brutal combo. You would Thunder Wave a bunch of things and then click Rock Slide, and then anything you hit probably wouldn't attack, and then you would just KO them. It was really, really mean. Terrakion also saw a small resurgence during Scarlet and Violet. It didn't have any crazy finishes, but it was a legitimate strategy. It would often hold the Covert Cloak item to stop Fake Out and flinching in general, perhaps as like payback for all the Rock Slides it had to take back in the day. And it was used with Whimsicott. Now, this is one of my favorite things about Terrakion. It's probably the thing that I think about when I think about Terrakion, which is that it has the ability Justified, which gives it an attack boost every time it gets hit with a dark type move. And if you pair the ability Justified with the attack Beat Up, which attacks one time per Pokemon in your party and is a dark type move, you can instantly boost the Justified's Pokemon attack to 4 stages of increased attack, which is the equivalent of a 3 times multiplier. When it's used with both Whimsicott and Terrakion, it has a really cute name. It's called Terrakion, which I think is a fun fact and I really like. There is counterplay to this strategy, but like early on in the beginning of Black and White, when these Pokemon had like just been introduced, it was really hard to stop, and it was kind of the main strategy you had to watch out for a lot of the time during the beginning of these games, and it's kind of always going to be threatening. Of course, as the Pokemon have gotten faster and stronger, the strategy is a little bit less viable, or it's a little bit less threatening, I would say. Like, it's easier to have counterplay, but it's still really good. And if you let the combination get out of control, like you're probably just gonna lose. I was kind of excited for Iron Boulder because, like, I don't know, I have fond memories of Terrakion, even though I have a lot of unpleasant memories of Terrakion as well. I guess I did win my first nationals with Terrakion, and yeah, it got me 2 top cuts at Worlds, including a 2nd place. So yeah, I guess I like Terrakion, right? And so I was kind of hoping Iron Boulder would be the spiritual successor, kind of like Raging Bolt is the spiritual successor to Raikou. But Iron Boulder, at the time I'm recording this, doesn't seem super good. I wouldn't say it's a bad Pokemon. Like, it has seen a little success, but it doesn't seem like a great Pokemon either. So we'll have to see about Terrakion going forward, but it's done enough over the years that it definitely earns a top 3 place in the list. But it doesn't earn a top 2 slot in the list, because that slot goes to Stakataka. Stakataka is a rock and a steel type Pokemon that I think is really interesting. It's won multiple international and regional championships. It's won the World Championships back in 2019, and it's not really similar to any other rock type. Okay, in some ways it is, right? Like, it is a rock type, and that means that it is really slow, which is typical of a lot of rock type Pokemon. It also has a super high defense stat, just like a crazy high defense stat. But what sets Stakataka apart is actually one of the moves that it learns, being Trick Room. If you're wondering why Stakataka learns Trick Room when it's almost all psychic types that get this move, it's because Stakataka is a house, and the houses have rooms. So yeah, inside of Stakataka's house, there's one really weird, like, artsy, like, kind of like contemporary, like, yeah, artful, like, strange room, and that's the Trick Room. And when you use Trick Room, Stakataka takes all the Pokemon, they have to go inside, and then they're inside the Trick Room. Like, that's where they go. The thing about Trick Room is that because Stakataka is, I think, like, maybe legitimately the slowest Pokemon that has ever seen mainstream success, it's very good with Trick Room. Like, it would already be good inside of Trick Room, and the fact that it can set it up is pretty ridiculous. And it's actually pretty consistent at setting Trick Room up because, again, it's a steel type, which means it has a ton of resistances, and it's actually pretty consistent at setting Trick Room up because not only is it a steel type Pokemon, meaning it has tons of resistances, in addition to 2 quadruple weaknesses, which isn't good, but yeah, like, it does have a lot of resistances, but it also is, like, again, that super high defense stat. So if you're trying to clear it on the physical side, even with a fighting or a ground type move, you're not guaranteed if they have support. Stakataka, like Nihilego, was at its best during the restricted format of Sun and Moon, for the same reason, because it matched up really well into Xerneas, but also because it gets Wide Guard. Wide Guard is especially good when you have to deal with moves like Precipice Blades and Water Spout and Origin Pulse and Dazzling Gleam. Stakataka being able to Trick Room to take the speed advantage away from Xerneas, and then Gyro Ball to KO it in 1 hit, while also being able to support its team with Wide Guard. Very big deal. Really good Pokemon. If you watched my best Steel or Psychic type videos, you might have seen me talk about Bronzong, and if you might remember there, Bronzong was used in part because it's really good into Xerneas. This is basically the Bronzong of Sun and Moon. Like, it has Wide Guard. It's like basically an upgrade. It's a side grade, right? But it's a side grade that has some upgrade components to it, so it was used a lot more. And actually, when Stakataka won the World Championships, it actually used the item Rock EMZ to use Continental Crush to get around the fact that all of the physical rock type moves that it uses could miss. So it was used as kind of this, like, support Pokemon that could also deal tons of damage. My fun fact about Stakataka is that it has such a high defense stat that normally when you take a KO, Beast Boost will give you a defense boost. But if you intentionally lowered Stakataka's defense stat by using a suboptimal nature, you could get an attack boost instead. That being said, most of the time players still chose to get the defense boost because the theory was that like you wouldn't want to actively make your Pokemon worse. That just seems bad. But it was possible, and some players did see some success with attack boosting Stakataka. There was also a really funny match in hindsight, not funny for the casters at the time, where it was Stakataka versus Stakataka, and because they're both so physically bulky and because they're both so slow, they couldn't damage each other, and it went on for, I didn't watch it before recording this, but I remember it going on in my head for like 40 minutes. I remember it being like one of the saddest, most drawn out battles, and like the poor casters were just there suffering. If we can find it, we'll show clips here. It was really funny.
How comfortable are you in your seat? Because I'm going to tell you, I am just settling in for this one. Even if they do start hitting each other when they're not protecting or trick rooming, it is going to be an absolute wet noodle fight. Really not a problem. There's one. There's a hit.
Yeah, and it just did a tiny bit of damage. Stakataka also going for a Rock Slide.
Go on, my son.
It does just a tiny amount, not very effective. We're going to have to start seeing some critical hits or avoids or a little bit of action. And I don't know if it's translating to you guys on stream, but back in the crowd, we can hear them all laughing along and kind of getting behind their
there
player.
it is.
There's a flinch, a little bit of an excitement here from the Stakataka. It does flinch.
I don't want to call it early. I know you're all sat on the edge of your seat for this one. A solid 6 hit points dealt by that Rock Slide, as it does flinch. So maybe this is Luke's way back in.
The Rock Slide does connect, does pick up
There
the
it
KO,
is.
and game 1.
Anyway, all that's left now is to talk about the best rock type Pokemon, and we all know what it is, right? There's literally no surprises here. It's one of the best Pokemon of all time, right? Tyranitar. I mean, it's Tyranitar. What do you want me to say? Like, of course it's number 1. Like, Rock isn't even that good of a type, and then you have Tyranitar, okay? I think what you need to keep in mind about Tyranitar is that it has one of the single worst typings in the entire game, and yet it's still one of the best Pokemon. Not only does it have a quadruple weakness to fighting, but it also has a ton of other weaknesses. Like, just like an unbelievable amount, honestly. But its stats, move pool, and ability are just so turbo broken that it succeeds anyway. I think it's really telling that a Pokemon like Tyranitar got a Mega Evolution, which meant it got 100 more stat points, and it didn't even really use it. Like, it was already so good in its own that players didn't even feel the need to use their Mega on it. Tyranitar takes advantage of a lot of the strengths of rock types, with Sandstream making it tankier on the special side, its good attack and decent speed stat, and its huge physical defense stat as well. Not to mention the fact that it was fast enough that it could actually get a lot of flinches with Rock Slide, especially if you boosted its speed in some way. You would probably think that as a Gen 2 Pokemon, Tyranitar would have surely fallen behind the times by now thanks to power creep, but as recent as this year, it is still winning tournaments. I think another big strength of Tyranitar is just how flexible it is. It can hold so many different items and use so many different moves. The standard set nowadays uses Assault Vest and like 4 attacking moves, but I won Nationals and got second at Regionals with a Focus Sash Dragon Dance Tyranitar that actually didn't even use a Dark type move. It was Protect, Rock Slide, Dragon Dance, and Low Kick. And then 6 years later, I won a Regional with Dragon Dance Darkinium Z Tyranitar as kind of the spiritual successor. Tyranitar is the premier Sandstream user, and it's one of the best Pokemon of all time. I'm sure that we'll continue to see more of it going forward. Thanks for watching. If you like this video and you want to see more before the series ends, you should go watch the best flying type Pokemon. That was the most recent one before this one, and I think it's really interesting. It was a hard one to make, but I think there's some really interesting tidbits on there.